Stand up. Hands where I can see them. Now!
Officer, may I know why I'm being stopped?
Because I said so.
Officer, please. He's just eating breakfast.
I would rather finish my breakfast.
Do what I say!
I only need head. One phone call.
Another fake hero.
The diner had gone silent, and every person in it had already decided what they were looking at. They were looking at a con man finally getting caught. And they were wrong about nearly all of it. A police officer stood over a corner booth, his face gone red, one hand resting near his hip. In the booth sat a man who was not moving at all, a fork resting on the rim of his plate, a cup of coffee going cold beside it.
"Show me your ID," the officer said. "Right now." The man in the booth did not answer.
"Bradley," said the waitress from behind the counter, keeping her voice soft and even. "He is just eating. Let him eat."
"Stay out of it, Delia," the officer said, and he did not turn to look at her. On the man's jacket, pinned near the collar, was a small dark patch, a trident, almost impossible to see unless you already knew to look for it. The officer knew to look. He had spent his whole life looking at badges like that and feeling something twist in his chest. "You bought that online," he said. "You are wearing a warrior's badge you did not earn. You understand that is a crime."
The man in the booth finally raised his eyes.
Nobody in that room actually knew who he was. Not his name, not his work,
Not the thing he had done 11 days earlier in a place with no name. All they knew was that he was calm in a way that did not fit the situation, calm the way deep water is calm, and that the officer leaning over him had mistaken that stillness for guilt.
"I would rather finish my breakfast," the man said. It was not the answer the officer wanted, and it would turn out to be the first small crack in a morning that would bury Officer Bradley Jenkins alive. 3 days earlier, a transport that does not appear on any public schedule had landed on a runway that does not appear on any public map, and a man had walked off it carrying one small bag and a great deal of silence. He would eventually give his name as Aiden Michael, though on this particular morning, his name was the last thing he intended to hand to anyone. Someone had put a piece of paper in his hand when he landed, and the paper said, in the flat, bloodless language of the military, that he was ordered to rest. The flight surgeon had said it more plainly. "Go somewhere quiet, sit still, try to remember there is a world that is not a target." So he had driven until the towns got small and the sky got wide, and he had found a diner with red booths and a hand-painted sign. And he had ordered eggs and coffee and asked for nothing else, because asking for nothing was the thing he was best at. He was also carrying something he could not set down. 11 days ago he had been somewhere very dark, and not everyone who went in beside him had come back out. And he was not permitted to speak of it, and would not have known how even if he had been. So he had folded it up small, the way he always did, and he had come to a strange town to teach his hands to stop expecting a door to be kicked in. Here was the flaw in him, the one that mattered, because everyone in this story carried one. The same wall that kept him alive had cost him nearly every soft thing in his life. He pushed people away as a reflex, without deciding to, and there was exactly one person left in the world who still loved him, and he had not spoken to her in 4 years. He did not know, as he sat down in that booth, that a patrol car was already turning off the road into the gravel lot outside. He did not look up when the bell above the door rang, and that, too, would cost him. Officer Bradley Jenkins had wanted to be a hero since he was a boy, and the reason for it stood in a framed photograph on his mantel at home. His father had been a real cop, the kind people straightened up around, the kind who got a full church at his funeral. Bradley had grown up in that long shadow, and had spent every year since trying to grow tall enough to fill it. At 18, he had walked into a recruiting office certain that greatness was a formality, and he had washed out of boot camp in 6 weeks. He never told anyone the real reason. The town got a story about a bad knee. Bradley kept the truth, which was worse, that somewhere in the mud a drill instructor had looked straight through him to a soft and frightened center, and that he had felt that look on the back of his neck every day since. So he built a different kind of armor. he became a police officer in a town small enough that the badge made him a king. And he learned a private pleasure that he never spoke about to anyone. He learned to look people up. Late at night, alone at the precinct terminal, he would type names into a restricted federal database that exists so police can check criminals. And he would run neighbors, an ex-girlfriend, the man who had beaten him for a promotion. And he would collect what he found the way other men collect stamps. He had a place to put it too, an online forum, under a name that was not his own, where men like him traded the small, cruel powers of small, cruel jobs. Lately, those forums had been full of a particular kind of thread. Long, angry lists of how to spot a fake soldier, how to catch a stolen Valor fraud, how a real operator supposedly looked and moved and talked. Bradley had read every one of them. He had been waiting, without quite admitting it, for a chance to be the man who caught one. On the morning it all ended, he pushed open the diner door, because the coffee was free, and the attention was free. And he scanned the room the way he always did, hunting for something to own. He found a black man in a corner booth, sitting too still, wearing a warrior's badge on a civilian jacket. And every wrong idea Bradley Jenkins had ever carried lit up at once. "That is a nice jacket," Jenkins said, stopping at the booth. "Cold out for October." Aiden nodded once and kept eating. "That patch there is a Navy Trident," Jenkins said. "You a SEAL?" Aiden set the fork down. "I would rather not talk," he said. "I am just eating breakfast." Something hot moved behind Jenkins's eyes, because the man would not perform for him. He would not scramble, or explain, or do the small anxious dance that frightened people do when a badge leans over them. And to Bradley Jenkins, that calm meant only one thing, which was disrespect. "Stand up," he said. "Let me see some ID." "Am I being detained?" Aiden asked. "Or am I free to go?" The question landed wrong, because it was the kind of question a person asks when they know the law better than the officer standing over them. And nothing frightened Bradley like the suspicion that someone in the room was smarter than he was. "You are whatever I say you are," Jenkins said. "That is not how it works," Aiden said, "and I think you know that." Behind the counter, Delia felt her stomach drop, because she had served cops for 11 years, and she knew the difference between a man doing his job and a man settling a private score. And this was the second kind. She wanted to say something. She even reached for the phone in her apron. Then she remembered that the sheriff of this county went fishing with Bradley Jenkins every Sunday, and she took her hand back out, empty, and said nothing. And she would carry that silence for a long time. "Officer," Aiden said, his voice staying low and even, "I have not committed a crime. I am not driving, and I am not required to identify myself to you. I would like to finish my meal." Here was the flaw in the man, laid bare in a single sentence. Every word of it was true, and every word of it was pride. He could have ended the whole thing in 5 seconds, shown a card, said one word, made one call, and walked out clean into the cold October morning. He did not, because he had spent his entire life refusing to explain himself to men who had already decided who he was. And he did not understand yet how much that refusal was about to cost, and not only him. Bradley reached for his handcuffs. For half of 1 second, his hand stopped over the cuffs. Some quiet part of him, the part that was his father's son, whispered that this was wrong, that this man had done nothing, that there was still time to laugh it off and walk away. Then he felt the whole diner watching him, and he understood that he could not back down now without shrinking in front of the entire town. And so the frightened boy from that long-ago boot camp made the frightened boy's choice. He snapped the cuffs on hard, hauled Aiden up out of the booth, and turned him against the wall, listing charges in a loud, proud voice built for an audience: fraud, stolen valor, disorderly conduct. And the man did not resist. He could have. Later, people who understood what Aiden Michael actually was would arrive at the same silent conclusion, that he could have taken the cuffs and the baton and the weapon and the officer's dignity in under 2 seconds, and no one in the room would have seen his hands move. Instead, he put his wrists together and held them out, because he had learned in the war that the most dangerous thing a professional can do is stay in perfect control of himself while the other man loses control of everything. Behind the counter, Delia did something in that moment that she did not plan, and could not have explained. Her phone was already in her hand, low against the counter, and her thumb found the record button, and she filmed the whole thing with her hand shaking, and she would be too frightened to tell a single soul about it for 2 full days. At the door, Jenkins pushed Aiden's head down toward the patrol car and leaned in close. "Big tough operator," he said. "What are you going to do now?" Aiden looked at him, calm, almost gentle. "I get one phone call," he said. "And then, officer, I am going to feel very sorry for you." Jenkins laughed. He would remember that laugh later, in a concrete room, in the worst hours of his life. The precinct smelled of burnt coffee and floor wax, and Sergeant Maya Ellison had a bad feeling before she could name a reason for it. 22 years on the job teaches you the difference between a real arrest and a grudge with paperwork attached. And Jenkins came through the door wearing the grin of a man who has caught something enormous, which almost always meant he had caught nothing at all. She began the intake. "Name," she said. "Aiden Michael. Occupation." He was quiet a moment. "Federal employee," he said. "Sure you are," Jenkins said from across the room. It was something Ellison had never told anyone. For 2 years, she had kept a private file, quiet notes with dates on them, small things that added up. The week Jenkins pulled the same man over 4 times, the complaints that quietly disappeared. The nights he stayed alone at the terminal long after everyone else had gone home. She had never shown that file to a living person, and she had told herself she was waiting for the right moment. And some honest part of her knew that was only a polite word for never. She laid his belongings out in the plastic tray. A worn wallet, $40, keys, a folding knife, and a phone. She stopped at the phone. It was too heavy for its size. There was no logo anywhere on it. The seams were sealed, and one edge was made of a different material, almost as if it were built to be gripped or to be found. "Do not turn that on," Aiden said, and something in his voice made her look up. Because he had been calm through everything, and he was not calm about the phone. "That device needs to stay exactly as it is," he said. "Please." Across the room, Jenkins had already pulled out his own cell and was calling his fishing buddy the sheriff, because he had a big collar and he wanted someone to hear about it. Aiden turned back to Ellison. "I would like my phone call now," he said. She walked him to the old wall phone in the corner, glad of a reason to move him away from Jenkins. He dialed from memory, a number written on no paper anywhere in the world. Not a lawyer, not anyone whose name would have meant anything to the people in that room. It rang twice, and a woman answered. That was the first wrong note, the small strange bend in the shape of the expected story. Not a gruff old admiral, not a lawyer. A woman with a voice like still water. "Line," she said. "Go ahead." Aiden spoke, and it was not a sentence. It was a string, letters and numbers, a word, a second word, a name that was not his name, all of it delivered flat and low like coordinates read off a map. On the other end, the woman went silent, and it was a long silence, the kind that happens when a person hears the one thing they have spent years praying they would never hear. "Say it again," she said, slowly. He said it again. "Where are you?" she asked, and he told her the name of a town she had never heard of. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Is the device secure?" For the first time all day, Aiden hesitated. "No," he said. There was a sound on the line, a chair moving fast, and when she spoke again, the softness was gone. "Listen to me," she said. "Do not call a lawyer. Do not explain yourself to those people. Do not give them your name or your unit or your status. And whatever else happens, do not let anyone touch that device." "They already have it," he said. "It is in an evidence bag." There was a pause, a heartbeat too long. "Is it sealed?" "For now," he said. "Then you tell them, calmly, that it cannot be opened or powered on under any circumstances," she said. "And you tell them nothing about why." Across the room, Ellison mouthed a question at him. "Who is this?" Aiden did not answer, because the woman had just said one more thing, very quietly, that stopped him cold. "I am coming myself," she said. "You do not have to do that," he told her, and it was the first time in the whole call that his voice softened. "Yes," she said, and she hung up before he could argue. And people at her level did not come themselves.
Not ever.
While Aiden stood at the wall phone, Bradley Jenkins was having the best hour of his career. "Caught a live one," he told the sheriff, pacing, grinning. "Some guy playing dress-up as a SEAL, would not show ID, mouthed off, the whole routine. I got him on fraud and disorderly, the works." "You want me down there?" the sheriff asked. "Nah," Jenkins said. "I got it handled. Just wanted you to hear it from me first." He hung up, feeling 10 feet tall. "You want to know the truth?" he said to Ellison as he passed the booking desk. "Guys like that walk around wearing the uniform and the patch and the whole costume, and they have never done a hard thing in their lives, and somebody has to call it." Ellison did not look up from her paperwork. "Somebody has to call it," she agreed quietly. And she was not agreeing with the thing he thought she was. His eyes fell on the plastic evidence tray and on the strange black phone sitting in it. The one the con man had guarded so carefully. "Do not turn that on," the man had said. And nothing crawled under Bradley Jenkins's skin like being told there was a thing he was not allowed to touch. He picked up the bag. "Where are you going with that?" Ellison said sharply. "Evidence review," he answered, already walking toward the side room. "Relax, Sergeant. I am going to prove this thing is a cheap burner and this whole SEAL act is garbage." "Bradley, do not," she said. But he was already through the door. He sat at the metal desk, unsealed the bag, and turned the phone over in his hands, hating how serious it felt, needing it to be fake. Across the building, Aiden hung up the wall phone and turned just in time to see the side room door swing shut. And some instinct older than language made the hair stand up on his arms. The woman on the phone was a Rear Admiral named Eleanor Ward. She had 2 stars, a corner office in a building with 5 sides, and a reputation for a calm that unnerved men twice her size. She had put a great many operators into the dark and had brought most of them home, and she did not rattle. She was rattling now. She knew exactly who Aiden Michael was. She knew what he had done 11 days ago. In the country, the news would never connect to any of this. And she knew the cost of it. The men who had not come back, and the intelligence that had come back instead. Some of which was, at this exact moment, riding around in an evidence bag in a town she could not have found on a map an hour before. "Get me that precinct, main line," she told her aide, "and spin up the response team. Because if that device is out of secure custody, I want federal agents on the ground before dark." "Ma'am," the aide said, "you are due in a briefing in 20 minutes. "Cancel it," she said, already pulling on her coat. "Cancel everything." He had worked for her 3 years and had never once seen her cancel anything. "Ma'am," he asked carefully, "this operator, who is he to you?" She stopped at the door and looked for a moment as though she might not answer at all. "He is the reason I am still in this job," she said. "Get me a car." 400 miles away, in a small side room that smelled of burnt coffee, Bradley Jenkins found the power button on a device that men had died to protect. And he pressed it. Nothing happened. And that was the first terrible thing. He had expected a screen, a logo, a chime, something he could sneer at. Instead, the phone stayed black and silent, warm now against his palm. And a single dot of red light appeared in the corner of the housing and began to pulse, slow at first, then faster. Bradley did not know what he was looking at. What he was looking at was a scream. The device in his hands was not a phone in any way that mattered. It was a hardened field terminal built around one ruthless assumption, that if it ever powered on outside a secure environment, then the person carrying it had been captured or killed, and it was now in enemy hands, so it did not ring for help. It transmitted silently across encrypted channels to servers that never sleep, sending its location and its identity and one flag that translated, in the language of the people who received it, into the 3 worst words in their profession: asset, compromised, hostile. In 3 buildings in 3 states, screens turned red. "We have a live compromise," a technician said, half rising from his chair. "A Tier 1 terminal. It is powered on, it is transmitting, and it is sitting inside a civilian police network." A supervisor came around the desks fast. "Location," she said, and the technician read out the address of a small-town police station, and the room went quiet, because that made no sense at all. Those terminals came on in the worst places on Earth, in compounds and safe houses, and the hands of men who peeled them off the dead, not in American police stations, and nobody had ever written a plan for that. Up to that moment, everyone had thought this was a story about a police officer who arrested the wrong man. It was not. Not anymore. In the space of one button press, a petty grudge in a diner had become a federal security emergency, and the people at the very top were no longer asking whether the officer would be punished. They were asking a far darker question. They were asking whether this had been an accident at all. Somebody explained to me, the supervisor said, how a Tier 1 asset and his terminal ended up in the hands of a beat cop in the middle of nowhere. Because either this is the dumbest coincidence in the history of this office, or somebody built it. Nobody had an answer. Assume the worst until we prove otherwise, she said. Move like someone wanted this. The beacon did not only call friends. That was the part that mattered. The part that turned the color of the whole afternoon. A distress signal announces a location. And a location can be read by anyone patient enough to be listening. And somewhere, someone had been very patient. 400 miles away, Aiden stood very still in the booking area and did arithmetic that no one else in the building could do. For the first time since the diner, his composure broke, not for himself, but for the men whose safety lived inside the walls of that device. Men still out in the dark, whose whole protection was that nobody knew what that terminal knew. "Sergeant," he said, and his voice had changed, gone low and urgent. "Your officer just powered on that device. Do you understand what that means?" "No," Ellison said. "I do not." "It means we have minutes," he said, "maybe less. There are people whose lives just got shorter because of what he did in that room. And I need federal agents here now." "You keep saying federal," she said. "Aiden, who are you?" "That does not matter right now," he said. "It matters to me," she answered, "because I am about to make phone calls that end careers in this building, and I would like to know I am doing it for a good reason." He looked at her, and for the first time all day he told a stranger something true. "I protect people who will never know my name," he said. "That is the entire job. And your officer just told the wrong people exactly where some of them are." She held his eyes 1 second longer. Then she picked up the phone and did not set it down for an hour. Out in the grey afternoon, closing in fast, they both heard sirens that did not sound local. 26 years ago, a young lieutenant named Eleanor Ward had been assigned to a community program in a hard part of a hard city, and there she had met a boy of 11. Too quiet. Watchful in the way children get when the adults around them have taught them that adults cannot be trusted. His name was Aiden. His mother was gone, and his father was worse than gone, and the state was about to move him to a place that broke children. And Eleanor Ward, who was not supposed to get involved, got involved. She became his legal guardian. She raised him in the margins of a demanding career, taught him to be still and patient, taught him to let the world underestimate him and then use it, and she watched him grow into the most disciplined person she had ever known. And she watched him choose the hardest road the military had to offer, and she had been proud and afraid in equal measure ever since. 4 years ago they had stopped speaking, and it had been her fault. She had chosen a mission over him at a moment when he needed her, and he had done the thing he always did when someone hurt him, built a wall and put her on the far side of it. She had told herself there would be time to fix it. Now she was in a government car doing 90 on a rural highway because the boy she had raised had used the number she gave him for emergencies only, and the last time she heard his voice, he was telling her a device was not secure. Somewhere over the ocean, in a place she was cleared to know about, and you are not, her phone buzzed with an update from the response desk, and she read it once, and then she read it again, and she pressed her knuckles hard against her mouth, because the beacon had done exactly what a beacon does, and the update in her hand was the first small proof that this was going to cost more than a career. "Faster," she told the driver. They came in 3 black vehicles that did not slow for the parking lot, and the agents who stepped out did not swagger. They moved with the flat economy of people who have done this in far worse places, and the lead agent was through the front door before the desk officer had finished standing up. "Federal agents," he said, holding up credentials no one in that building was going to argue with. "Who is in charge here?" Chief Harlan Briggs came out of his office and made the worst mistake of his career, which was to try to manage it. "Chief Briggs," he said, offering a hand no one took.
I am sure this is all a misunderstanding. My officer made a lawful arrest of a man who could not verify his identity. Your officer, the agent said, arrested a federal asset and seized classified equipment that is now transmitting a compromise signal from inside your building. So no, Chief, this is not a misunderstanding. Briggs went pale. His first instinct under fire was not the truth. It was containment, because he was 30 years into a career and could feel the pension at the end of it. And every one of those years told him to make this small and quiet and gone. Whatever you need, he said smoothly. Full cooperation. Let me just sort out the paperwork on our end first. We will need every recording device in this building preserved immediately, the agent said. And Briggs, without quite deciding to, glanced up at the ceiling camera in the corner. Only for a second.
The lead agent caught it. Is there a problem with your cameras, Chief? He asked. No, Briggs said too fast. No problem. There was a problem. Briggs already knew there was going to be a problem, and down the hall in a holding cell, Aiden Michael sat with his cuffed hands in his lap and understood that the machinery he most feared was not the federal agents in the lobby. It was the quiet local instinct to protect its own. For a while, the wrong people looked like they were going to win. The precinct camera that covered the booking area, the one that would have shown Aiden calm and cooperative and Jenkins raging, came back with 2 hours of corrupted footage on exactly the wrong afternoon. A glitch, the technician said. It was not a glitch. The sheriff arrived, Jenkins's fishing partner, and pulled Briggs aside, and the two of them talked in low voices about protecting the department, about how it would look, about how one bad arrest should not sink good men who had given their lives to this town. Across the room, watching, Bradley Jenkins began to breathe again. Without the footage, it was his word against a man who would not even give his name. And cops closed ranks. That was how it worked. That was how it had always worked. And maybe, he thought, he was going to be fine. Maybe better than fine. Maybe he was the officer who had cracked open something big. The lead agent felt the room shift, felt the slow, quiet machinery of a department protecting its own. And he knew that federal weight could seize a device, but could not by itself prove what had happened in that diner. He needed a witness. He needed proof. At that same hour, in a small house on the edge of town, a waitress named Delia sat on the edge of her bed with her phone in both hands, staring at a video she had been too frightened to show anyone. Her thumb hovered over the delete button. If she erased it, she could pretend she had never been there, and nobody would come asking. And Bradley Jenkins would never look her up in his database and post her life on the internet the way she had heard, in whispers, that he did to people who crossed him. She thought about the man in the booth, who had held out his wrists without a word, who had looked at her once, at the very end, like he was worried about her. And she took a long breath and did not press delete. She drove to the precinct the next morning with her hands shaking on the wheel, and at the desk she asked for the federal agent and not the local police. When Ellison heard the request, something in the older sergeant's chest came loose, because she had spent 2 years waiting for the right moment to be brave. And here was a waitress simply being it, with no file and no rank and no plan, just a phone and a decision. I have something you need to see, Delia told the lead agent. I filmed it, the whole arrest, from behind the counter. Why did you film it? He asked, gently, not accusing, only asking. Because I was scared, she said. And because the second Bradley put those cuffs on, I knew somebody was going to lie about what happened in my diner, and I did not want to be the person who let them. You could have deleted it, he said. I almost did, she answered. Twice. What stopped you? She thought about it. He looked at me once, she said, right at the end. He was the one in handcuffs, and he looked at me like he was worried about me, and I thought, if he can be that calm with his whole life falling apart, I can be brave enough to hold up a phone. The agent took the phone, watched 20 seconds and stopped, and looked up, and his face had changed. Ellison understood in that moment that the corrupted precinct footage no longer mattered, because a frightened waitress with a cracked phone screen had done what an entire police department had tried to prevent. But the video did more than save one man from a false charge. The agent scrolled back to the beginning,
And there in the corner of the frame, plainly visible, was the strange black phone sitting in the evidence tray, and a timestamp, and later, Bradley Jenkins's own hand reaching in to take it. The recording did not only prove the arrest was a lie, it put a name and a face and a time to the question the people in the windowless rooms were still asking. And the answer was about to send this story somewhere no one had expected it to go. And then, for 2 full days, Bradley Jenkins escaped. His police union sent a lawyer, a sharp one, and the lawyer found what lawyers find. The arrest paperwork had holes in it. The chain of custody on the device had been broken the moment Jenkins carried it into that side room, which meant, the lawyer argued, that the whole federal circus rested on a seizure that never should have happened. A local judge, a friend of the sheriff, agreed to throw out the original charges against Aiden as improperly obtained, and the same ruling, read a certain way, made Jenkins look less like a criminal and more like a scapegoat. The town took his side. It happened fast, the way these things do. A hometown officer, a good family name, a father everyone had loved, railroaded by faceless federal agents, and some stranger who would not even say who he was. There was a rally outside the precinct. There were signs. A local station put Bradley on the evening news, and he stood in front of the camera in a clean shirt with his chin up, and said he had only ever tried to do his job, and that he trusted the good people of this town to see the truth. He believed it. For those 2 days he believed he had won. And worse, so did a lot of people who should have known better. He was standing on the precinct steps on the second evening, shaking hands, letting an old woman tell him he was a fine young man, when a plain federal car pulled to the curb and 2 agents got out. And they were not there about the diner at all. They walked up the steps through the little crowd, past the signs, and the lead agent said quietly, so quietly that the cameras almost missed it, "Officer Jenkins, we need to talk to you about your computer." And Bradley Jenkins, at the very top of his false victory, felt the floor of it give way beneath his feet. When a classified device is compromised inside a computer network, the response is not to grab it and leave. The response is to take the entire network apart down to the wiring, to learn what the intrusion touched. And so a cyber team had gone into that little precinct's servers with tools built to hunt nations. They were looking for a foreign intrusion. What they found was worse and closer to home. For years, from one terminal, someone had been running searches in the restricted federal database, hundreds of them. None tied to any case, none tied to any crime, just names. Neighbors, co-workers, women, men who had crossed him. The login belonged to Officer Bradley Jenkins, and that alone was a federal crime that sends people to prison. But the team followed where the stolen information went, and that was where the ground truly opened. It went to his forum, under his fake name, the place where he had at last felt respected and feared, where he had posted pieces of real people's private lives for years and traded them with other usernames who did the same. And one of those usernames was not what it appeared to be. This was the thing that made everyone stop and look back at the whole story with new eyes. Those angry threads Bradley had been reading for months, the lists of how to spot a fake soldier, how to catch a stolen Valor fraud, how a real operator supposedly looked and moved. They had not grown there by accident. Someone had been seeding them, patiently, across forums exactly like his, cultivating men exactly like him, priming badge-carrying men with grudges to go out and confront and detain and demand identification from quiet strangers who fit a profile, and to photograph and to run and to report what they found. It was a net cast wide. And Bradley Jenkins had been one of 100 nets, and he had never once suspected that the secret power he was so proud of had made him the easiest kind of man in the world to use. The diner had not been random. The prejudice had been real, but it had also been aimed. Bradley had walked in that morning already loaded, already pointed, by someone who understood that a small man hungry to feel large will pull his own trigger if you simply tell him where to look. He had thought he was the hunter. He had been the tool. And the beacon he set off in his vanity had, that same afternoon, exposed a location on the other side of the world. Rear Admiral Eleanor Ward reached the small town after dark, and the first thing she did was not go to Aiden. The first thing she did was stand alone in a borrowed office and read a report she had been dreading since the highway. When the beacon lit up, a location had been compromised, and a team already in the field had been forced to move early, in daylight, without the cover they had planned on. Most of them had come home. One of them had not come home whole. A young man Aiden had trained was in a hospital he could not be told the name of, and he was going to live, and he was never going to walk the same way again.
She carried that into the room where they let her see Aiden, and she did not soften it, because he had never once thanked anyone for softening a thing. "You need to hear this from me, and not from a file," she said. And she told it. He took it standing, the way he took everything, and for a long moment he did not speak. Then he said the thing she had been afraid he would say, and had known he would say. "If I had shown the card," he said, "if I had just said one word to that man in the diner, none of this happens. He never touches the device. The beacon never goes off. That kid is walking tomorrow." She could have told him it was not his fault. It would even have been mostly true. The prejudice was Jenkins's. The button was Jenkins's. The whole ugly machine belonged to people neither of them had ever met. But she had raised him to tell the truth, and the truth was more complicated than comfort. "You did not do this," she said, "but you were a link in it, and the discipline you are so proud of failed you for exactly 5 seconds in that booth, because you would rather be right than be finished. That is the price of the wall, Aiden. It keeps everyone out, including the moment where you just end the thing and go home." He said nothing. He was not a man who cried, and he did not cry now, but something in his face went somewhere very far away, and Eleanor Ward, who loved him more than she had ever loved anything, let him stand alone in it, because that was the only honest gift she had left to give him. There was a woman named Rosa Delgado, and 2 years earlier she had filed a small complaint about a rude traffic stop, and she had all but forgotten it. Bradley Jenkins had not forgotten it. He had looked her up and posted her home address on his forum in a thread about people who did not respect the badge, and 3 weeks later a man she had never met was standing in her driveway at night. And she never learned how he found her, and she had not slept properly since. Now a federal agent sat across from her at her kitchen table and explained, gently, exactly how the man in her driveway had found her. Rosa put her hand over her mouth. "It was real," she said. "The whole time, it was real." "Yes," the agent said, "it was real, and I am sorry no one believed you." "I told people," she said. "I told the police, and you know what they said? They said I was being paranoid. They said nobody was watching me." The agent was quiet a moment. "The person telling you that you were paranoid," he said, "was very possibly the person watching you." When Bradley heard the federal agents were pulling his forum, he thought he was safe, because he had deleted it, wiped the account, erased every post, and in his mind, the man he had been online no longer existed. He did not understand that nothing a person is proud of ever truly disappears, because somewhere, someone always keeps a copy. Rosa slid a folder across her kitchen table to the agent. "I saved everything," she said. "For 2 years. I did not know what it was. I only knew somebody was doing this to me, and I was not going to be the only one who remembered." The agent opened it, and there it was. Screenshots and dates. Bradley's fake name printed next to Rosa's real address in his own words. The quiet people had been keeping the receipts the whole time, waiting, not out of weakness, but because they knew the truth did not need to shout in order to arrive. They went to Bradley's house that evening, and word had traveled the way it does, and neighbors stood on their porches in the blue dusk while federal vehicles lined the quiet street. An old man who had lived across the way for 20 years said the thing a lot of them were thinking, that Bradley had always seemed so squared away, that he waved every morning, and then he went quiet, remembering the odd feeling he had never been able to name. The sense that the friendly officer across the street knew a little too much about everyone on the block and never said how. Now he knew how. Inside, Bradley's wife Karen stood in the doorway with her arms wrapped around herself, watching agents carry boxes past her, saying the same words over and over. "I did not know." And everyone believed her, because that is how men like Bradley operate. The performance at home is a decent man, and the rot is kept behind a locked door. They opened the locked door. Inside was the shrine of a man who had ached his whole life to be someone else. Posters, replica gear arranged with a care he had never once shown a living person. A computer, a filing cabinet. In the bottom drawer, under everything, they found a handwritten log. He had kept a record. Every unauthorized search, every name, everything he had done with it, dated and detailed in his own hand. And at first the agents could not understand why a man would so carefully document his own crimes. Then they understood. It was insurance. He had kept it as leverage over the other men on the forum. Proof of who owed what to whom, a small king guarding his small kingdom. And in his pride and his paranoia, he had built the entire case against himself, page by page, and locked it in a drawer, and forgotten it. Well, the lead agent said, bagging it carefully, that will save the prosecutors some time. And upstairs, going through a shelf the agents had not reached yet, Karen Jenkins found a folder with her own name on it, and below her name, her son's. Karen opened the folder with her name on it and found that her husband had run her too, before they married. Her history, her past, the things she had told him in confidence and the things she never had. He had checked her the way he checked strangers, and kept it and never said a word. She sat down on the floor of the hallway and could not get up for a while. When she finally stood, she found her son Cody watching her from the kitchen doorway. "Mom," he said, "what is all of this? What did he do?" And Karen, who had spent 17 years protecting her son from every hard thing, found that she could not protect him from this one. "I do not know all of it," she said, "but it is real, Cody. It is not a mistake. It is not people twisting things." "How do you know?" he said. She held up the folder with her own name on it. "Because he did it to me too," she said. Cody was 17, and he had spent his whole life being told he came from good men. A grandfather who filled a church and a father with a badge. He was the one who answered the door the next morning when a reporter came. And he was the one who read the headline, and he was the one who saw, in words that could not be argued with, what his father had actually been. That evening, Bradley was allowed a phone call from custody, and he called home, and Cody answered. "Cody, listen to me," Bradley said, and his voice was already doing the thing it always did, already spinning, already explaining. "This is all a misunderstanding. These people are twisting it. You know me. You know who I am." There was a long silence on the line. And then his son said the only thing he had left to say. "I do not want your last name anymore," Cody said, and hung up. Bradley Jenkins stood in a concrete room holding a dead phone and understood, at last, that he had not lost his job. He had lost every single thing a job was ever meant to protect. They let Ward see Aiden again before the case went forward, and she came to him with an offer she had the power to make. "I can make this quiet," she said. "All of it. The arrest, the record, your name, the whole afternoon. I can have it sealed by morning, and you will never have to think about this town again. You did nothing that requires a trial. You do not owe these people your story." And here, the man who had spent his whole life hiding behind a wall did the bravest thing he does anywhere in this story. He said, "No. There is a waitress," he said, "who was afraid and told the truth anyway. There is a woman named Rosa who was not believed for 2 years. There is a young man in a hospital who will never walk right again, and part of that is on me. And if I make this disappear, then they all disappear with it. And the only person who walks away clean is the one who least deserves to. Let it stand. Let all of it stand, my part included." Ward looked at him for a long moment. "You sound like someone I used to know," she said quietly. "Someone I raised." "I was angry at you for 4 years, he said. "I know," she said. "You had reason." "No," he said. "I had a reason." "I do not think I had the right." "You chose the mission. That is the job. It is the same job I choose every time I get on a plane. I was angry at you for being exactly what you taught me to be." She did not trust her voice. "I called you today," he said. "Out of everyone in the world, when it went wrong, my hand just dialed your number. I did not even think about it." "I noticed,"
she said, "and it is the best thing that has happened to me in 4 years, and I am ashamed of how glad I am, given what it cost." He almost smiled. "I had a good teacher," he said. "I should have told her that more often. And 4 years of wall did not come down all at once, but a door in it opened. And that was enough to begin."
The federal courtroom was small and bright and merciless. Bradley Jenkins sat at the defense table in a suit that no longer fit because he had lost weight in the waiting, and he listened as the case was laid out in a voice with no cruelty in it, and no mercy either. The searches, the forum, the strangers he had been fed to and had never understood he was feeding. And worst of all, in his own handwriting, the confession he had kept out of pride. Before the sentence, the people he had harmed were allowed to speak, and Rosa Delgado stood, and her voice shook. "For 2 years," she said, "I thought something was wrong with me. I checked my locks 4 times a night. I stopped opening my curtains. I did not tell my daughter why we moved. I thought I was losing my mind, and the whole time it was not in my head. A man with a badge decided I was his to watch, and handed my home to strangers because I once said he was rude to me." She looked at him then, for the first time. "I am not afraid of you," she said. "I found out you are a small man with a keyboard. That is all you ever were." She did not shout, because she did not have to. And Bradley had to sit and listen to every word, and he could not talk over her, and he could not run her through a database to make himself feel large. His lawyer argued for leniency, years of service, a clean record, a moment of poor judgment. The prosecutor stood and answered with one sentence. "Your Honor," she said, "this was not a moment. This was a decade." The judge spoke to Bradley directly, in a voice like a closing door. "You were given a public trust," she said, "tools that exist to protect people, and you use them to make ordinary citizens into your private prey. And when a real servant of this country sat quietly in front of you, harming no one, you could not stand it, so you tried to destroy him, and instead, you destroyed yourself. 3 years in federal prison," she said, 5 years of supervised release, and a permanent bar from ever again holding a badge or any position of public trust. The gavel came down, and they led him out in handcuffs, and the metal closed over his wrists with the same small, bright sound he had loved so much in the diner. At the door, he stopped and looked back at the gallery, searching for the calm man's face. But the gallery was full of the people he had wronged, and the man he was looking for was already gone. The gallery held Rosa Delgado, who had been believed at last. It held Maya Ellison, who had finally handed someone her file, and who would spend the rest of her career being the sergeant who did not look away. And it held Delia, the waitress, sitting in the back row in her good coat, the woman whose shaking hands had held a phone steady enough to change everything. Outside the courthouse, in the cold, a federal agent came and stood beside Delia. "We had the whole weight of the government on this," he said. "A 2-star admiral, a unit you have never heard of, agencies with no names. And the thing that actually did it was a waitress who was too scared to sleep for 2 nights and came in anyway." Delia shrugged, embarrassed. "I just filmed it," she said. "Anybody would have." "No," the agent said. "They would not have. That is the whole point. Aiden Michael was not there to see any of it, because he was already gone. Back into work he could not speak about, carrying a young man's ruined leg alongside everything else he carried. He had let the case stand with his own name in it, had chosen to be seen, once, so that the people he could not save from a distance would at least not be erased. It was the closest thing to an apology a man like him knew how to make. And it was the first time in years he had let the world look at him on purpose. Somewhere over the Pacific, on the open ramp of a transport in the roaring dark, a younger operator leaned in to be heard over the engines. "Heard you had some trouble stateside," he shouted. "A cop thing." "Something like that," Aiden said. "What happened?" the young man asked. Aiden checked the light above the ramp, still red. "A man decided he knew who I was," he said. The light turned green and Aiden Michael stepped off the back of the aircraft into the dark, and the night took him without a sound. The loud man spent his whole life trying to be seen, and it ended with the whole world seeing exactly what he was.
The quiet ones he had stepped on, the waitress and the sergeant and the woman he doxed, turned out to be the ones holding everything that mattered, because they had been paying attention the entire time, the way the overlooked always are. So be careful how you treat the people you decide are beneath you, the ones refilling your coffee, waving from across the street, sitting too quiet in the corner booth. You do not know what they have survived, and you do not know what they are keeping. The loudest thing in any room is a small man insisting on his own importance, and the most dangerous is the person he never bothered to notice.